Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today in San Diego at the RESI conference. I'm Donna Lavoie. I'm CEO of Lavoie Health Science, which is a strategic communications firm helping life science and healthcare companies in their strategic communications, including IR and PR. I've been asked to fill in for my colleague, Angus McQuilkin, who unfortunately got stuck in Boston last night, so I'll do my best to fill his shoes. But I'd like to kick it off by some introductions by our esteemed panelists. I'm joined by four executives and entrepreneurs who are all experienced in several phases of financing, and my understanding is that all of them are currently in financing mode from Series A all the way to Series D. So I'll kick it off by letting them make some intros on themselves. Magda?
All right, Donna, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be at the conference. And I am an entrepreneur / investor. I started two companies from scratch. One of them called Althea, which is a biologics company, and we sold it to Ajinomoto in 2013, and Ajinomoto decided to continue to grow the company in San Diego, so we're very excited about that, and I remain chairman of the company, and I'm still very involved in terms of strategic decisions with Ajinomoto, which is quite unique, I would think. And then I also founded a company called Althea Diagnostics, which is a precision medicine company, also based in San Diego, and we're right around the Series D. We just completed the Series D. And then in addition to that, I started a fund where we invest in early stage companies, and that could be in the area of diagnostics, in digital health, as well as therapeutics. So we have a pretty broad portfolio. And so because of that, I would say that I am in the mode of seed investment, Series A, all the way to mature investment. And as we will discuss today, it's very different in terms of the kind of investors that you're looking for, in terms of the expertise, knowledge, in terms of board considerations. All of that is very different depending on the stage of the company, obviously. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Tippy. I'm the CEO of a company called Lipidomics, and I'm also an investor, as Magda is. So our business model at Alignment Ventures, which is the investment firm that I'm involved with, is to run the companies that we start. So I cut my teeth with Larry Bach here in San Diego. Larry did 22 companies worth $75 billion today, same model. So Lipidomics is one of the companies that we've started, and I'm running. It has to do with lipids in the skin and the treatment of eczema and other inflammatory mediated skin diseases. I'm also an executive in a company called Neuromedica, which is a medical device company that's developing a bioresorbable system for closing the dura of the spine during neurosurgery. And I've done 8 startups before that. The most recent one was a company called Megabax. We merged that with Vir Biotechnologies, and Arch put $150 million in about 3 months later. So I just stepped down from that a year ago as CEO. So that's the model that we use. So I've been on both sides of the fence. I was at Norwest Venture Partners, a $4 billion firm, doing all their life science deals nationwide about 20 years ago. Done 2 seed funds. All I do is things that save lives. I don't touch anything else. I'm a medicinal chemist by training.
Wow. Good morning. I'm Joyce Lonergan. I'm CEO and co-founder of Mellitus LLC. It's great to be on the panel to talk about fundraising, because we're fundraising, and so as you probably know, you think about it 24 hours a day. We're raising a Series B financing to support our diagnostic for gestational diabetes, and glad to be part of this group.
And I'm Mike Marotti with Sensilin. We're developing a next generation insulin for type 1 and type 2 diabetes. I'm a biochemist by training, but was that guy that used to break very expensive lab equipment and just wasn't cut out for research. So I went over to the dark side, as they say, and became a business guy and an entrepreneur, largely in the advanced materials specialty chemicals space. And I did that for the better part of a decade. But what brought me back into healthcare was a profound family history with diabetes. Basically, both parents are now type 2 and insulin dependent. I have, out of my aunts and uncles, without exaggeration, 80% of them are also type 2. So that's what led me back into at least a company that was working on diabetic complications of the eye, and also had a small but highly profitable CRO between the United States and China, and then of course into this company as well. So looking to hopefully have a nice exit here pretty soon and make the transition that my colleagues have made into family office / investor land. And with that, of course, I have done this many, many times over, so excited to share some of my findings with you.
Great. So why don't we get started on the questions? But before we do, maybe just by show of hands, we could get a sense as to the representation in the room today. How many of you are executives of companies that are currently financing in the Series A or B stages? Okay. How about C or D or beyond? Okay, a few. Any investors? Okay, so it looks like we have a healthy mix. That's helpful, thank you. So to kick it off, let's just get started by asking the question about where are we seeing the latest fishing hole for sources of funding in today's environment. And why don't we start with Mike down at the end and make our way back to Magda.
Sure. So in our company, we made the decision that we did not want to go after these traditional venture fund, making the observation that a lot of the traditional early stage investors have raised such massive funds that it's really difficult for them to write a small check, meaning that we only needed like $3 million in our Series A. So we pursued the family office crowd and found that to be quite fruitful. We at least had a little bit of corporate venture interest early on. Weren't actually successful in closing any of them, but I think several of them are looking at the B round that we're raising. And I think perhaps most importantly, in terms of just percentage, we have been spending a fair amount of time in China, Hong Kong, Taipei, and finding that the gap that was left by traditional venture funds, sort of leaving that true early stage in most circumstances, has been filled by a lot of family offices and sort of corporate money from Asia. So at least for this B round, we actually have a lead as well that's from Shenzhen, Guangzhou area. And I guess I'll be heading back many, many times later this year as a result.
That's awesome. From Mellitus' point of view, we've certainly seen the greatest traction. Our fingerprints look a lot like, I think, the kind of book of what you'd expect for a Series Seed and Series A, where it's family and friends. And those have been our major supporters to date. As we look at Series B, we clearly are having traction with what we would call either evergreen investors, family offices, or, again, continuing to talk to family and friends, but more from an angel fund perspective. And since we're treating a global problem, we're certainly interested in global investors.
I would say it depends upon the type of company you're financing. So for medical devices, for example, there's been quite a retrenchment in the U.S. venture community. So I tend to look at family offices. I tend to look in Asia. For therapeutics, it's a very different picture. You need massive amounts of money. This is more diagnostic in med tech panel, isn't it?
I think it's everything.
Oh,
it's
okay.
covering everything. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it just depends on the deal, on the stage. I mean, I only do really early stuff. We seed these companies, we run them, and then we're out looking for a Series A. I hope to be out of the thing by the time and recruited the long-term CEO by the time, for sure, we've gotten to a Series B. So it really depends.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to say exactly the same thing as you, Michael, because it does depend on where you are in terms of maturity of the company and also the space. right? But very often, if you start a company, yes, you do the family, friends, and fools route. Where I think you need to include this. And then you really get started for the maybe pre-seed or seed. And then when you go to Series A, you can get angels, super angels. In San Diego, we're very lucky to have a very active angel community with groups such as TCA and others. We also have many entrepreneurs, like Mike, the other Mike there, said during his introduction, is like he wishes once he has a successful sale of the company, which he will because he's a terrific entrepreneur, he wishes to start a family office and then invest. And do that in San Diego, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So we have many of those. Those are not isolated events, and they really, really help. They make a difference in creating companies, right? But then at some point, you really need more than that. So in my view, it's a good idea to start discussions with VCs or institutional investors at the early days. Even if you don't need them, you need to really start these discussions and make sure that you're visible, because there's so much going on. I mean, you look at the hallway and see how many companies are there, and how are you going to pick the investor, the companies where you're going to be investing in, right? So it does depend, but you need to keep your eyes open on the immediate needs and then future needs. And it's hard because when you're an entrepreneur, you tend to look at, what are you going to be doing 5 hours from now? But you need to have a larger time span, I would say, and then look globally, because I do agree with the panel. I've seen a lot of investment coming from China or Japan these days, Europe, so it really becomes, it's very different from what it was 20 years ago or so.
Great. So let's dig in a little bit into the family funds and foreign investors such as China and Japan and so forth. I know from our own experiences in working with clients, these are sources that they are trying to crack, as well. And there's a lot of discussion about family offices, but it's been an area that's been sort of difficult to sort of find your way in, so to speak. So maybe the panel could address, a little bit more from a tactical perspective is how do you do it? What's your experience in weaving your way into that network? Maybe Magda, we'll start with you and go backwards.
Sure, I think that you use the right word, which is network. And you need to network a lot when you're an entrepreneur, and then you raise money, and you need to create a buzz, right? So you start somewhere, you start with a meeting and with a potential investor, and then if this investor says, yes, I'm in, that's great. If he says or she says, no, I'm not interested because this is not my cup of tea or whatever, then never leave the meeting without 3 names. Just say, well, could you please help me? Could you please give me some people in your network who you might think they're interested? And if people feel bad about telling you a no, they'll feel very good about giving you 3 potential yeses. And that's my experience. And then you kind of create a chain reaction. But you have to be a good storyteller, tell a very exciting story, and make sure that when you meet with potential investors, they won't be able to resist, and they'll be willing to introduce you to your friends. So that's, I think, how you do it. I don't think there is a specific rule, but be a storyteller and then network as much as you can.
Yeah, I agree with you, Magda. That's very, very important. I've been helped out quite a bit in using the Life Science Nation database, getting at family offices. These are extremely difficult targets to reach. You can't just pick up Pratt's Guide to Venture Capital and expect to be introduced to family offices. So there's quite a number in the Life Science Nation database. I also go to family office conferences. I actively network in that channel. because it's been fruitful.
Great. Michael, can you share which family office conferences you think are useful?
Oh my, there's a bunch of them.
Okay.
I mean, they're geographically split. There's at least 10 of them that I could think of. I'd be happy to send an email to anybody that wants a list, but I don't have it off the top of my
Okay.
head.
Joyce?
You know, Broadview Ventures just joined us as a family office kind of venture philanthropy investor. And I think the other piece that I would add, in addition to, we use the Life Science Database vigorously, and it's been a huge help in opening the door to the family office portal. But I also think that, you know, be mindful that a family office is different than a standard issue venture fund. Their diligence is different, and it's personal. And so there's a lot of, I think we found that there's the investment of us investing in the interaction with the family office, and it's been an enormous, rich, valuable investment because that relationship that we built with Broadview has been so fruitful in opening additional doors for us. And so, you know, as you said, Magda, looking down the road, what we found is there's the part of kind of prospecting, and that's very important, but there's also the intensity of investing in that interaction relationship, and it's been a very vigorous and important one to us. We're still, of course, raising our Series B, but Broadview's been hugely instrumental, and part of getting to know them came from the database, part of it came from networking, and there was a lot of kind of buying in on both sides. So I think the family office relationship is different than the standard venture relationship.
Yeah, I'd second that motion. I mean, don't expect that family offices will be stuffed with MD PhDs like they are in Sand Hill Road. It's not going to happen. So there's a lot more spoon feeding. I mean, the last deal I was in, Tomegavax, was extremely complicated immunology, cutting edge. And to try to explain that to family offices that were generalist investors was very tough indeed.
Well, I would echo the comments about warming up what would otherwise be a cold call. So we also use the LSN database. I've been going to JP Morgan and Bio for 10, 15 years, and you feel like you tend to meet most people, but I found there was at least another half of the database that I'd never even heard of. So between Life Science Nation and LinkedIn, you can pretty much find out who's in your network that knows the family office or that you're trying to reach out to. And of course, that tends to be very helpful. But the other quick pieces of advice I would have for groups trying to connect, whether you're the entrepreneur or the investor, the most important thing is to spend the time. So I was in China probably 5 times last year, and I'll be at least 3 or 4 times this year. There are many events like, I guess China Bio does great events. Silicon Valley Bank has one in the fall that's partnered with a lot of other groups. There's the China Healthcare Forum, which just happened not too long ago. And it sounds like maybe we need a Resi Shanghai or Shenzhen, but that would be...
Go for it, Matt.
Yeah. And then the other pieces with regards to, in our case, I don't speak Mandarin or Cantonese. We needed an advisor to sort of help us interface with the offices and get through diligence. I don't know, frankly, how we would have done it without having that at least external support. And I suppose the last piece of advice, which may be the most actionable, if you don't already have WeChat on your phone, you need to download it right now.
Yeah.
On my business card, I have a little barcode that somebody can just sort of put their little camera on and connect with me. And you'll find that email is pretty worthless with a lot of Chinese investors. It all happens via WeChat, so you definitely have to, I'm sorry to say, you have to join another social network.
Oh, that's really good practical advice. Do others on the panel have experience in Asia that they'd like to share beyond Mike?
Yeah, I certainly do. The company that I co-founded, AlteaDX, has been very heavily funded by Asian groups from mainland and from Hong Kong, and I think we've been very successful there, and we've been getting some groups that have experience globally in the U.S., and that's been very good for us. However, I think Asia is very broad, and when people say, "Oh, investors from China," it could be all kinds of things. I also heard from other companies where they were very advanced with a China deal, and then the money was not able to get out of the country, so they had some issues there. So I think that when you talk to foreign investors, it's a very good idea to find out, do they have a presence in the U.S.? all the serious ones do have a presence in the US, and then how many other deals have they made to make sure that they understand what we're all about, because it's so broad that I think it could be misleading sometimes. And in my case, we've been very successful with it, but in other companies that I know about, they had some tough situations because they thought the money was coming and coming and coming, and then never happened.
So how important do you think it is to have advisor or consultant in Asia to help weave through the process there?
Me? Sure. Well, again, I would say it depends on who you're talking to. If you have groups who have a presence in the U.S., you probably don't need that. But if that's not the case, then yes, it is very important because the culture is very different there. Very often when you talk to these groups, the top decision makers do not speak English. All the staff speaks English, but when you talk to the big guys, they don't speak English, so you are a bit lost and you don't know how to connect with them. So it's very important to have someone who's helping you in that path if you're dealing with a group which is only based in China, let's say.
And just as an observation, when I first started going to all of these different healthcare-focused events, you might find 10 or 20 groups from various parts of China or Greater China, and now it's several hundred. So just as an observation, there's a lot of really sophisticated investors and looking to find opportunities here in the United States and in Europe, and they come in many different flavors. So there's the family office crowd, there's the institutional crowd. Our Series A, our largest investor in the Series A was a group called Cowen Healthcare Ventures, and the two partners that are the life sciences partners are based in Beijing and Shanghai, and they're both, they could be working anywhere. They're like top graduates from Tsinghua and Peking University, Fudan University in China, and then picked up graduate degrees at Wharton and Johns Hopkins. So I think those types of groups tend to have funds either in the United States or Cayman Islands that are easily invested here in the States. But with regards to the funds that are predominantly RMB based, I have seen, at least in the last probably 30 to 60 days, a bit of a thawing of that capital constraint that was put in place back in December, which is to say that there was this big US-China trade deal that was announced, I think, in early May. And as I understand it, a lot of that, they call the SAFE Commission, the State Administration for Foreign Exchange, a lot of that decision-making has been pushed down to the provincial level. So, of course, Beijing, Shanghai, deals were starting to happen more quickly to get funds out. And in some of the other provinces, I understand that's also happening as a result. But it's, it's still a bit of a challenge to get through that commission, particularly when, as the entrepreneur, you think, let's do whatever we can to get things through, and you'll find that you really can't do a whole lot to accelerate that process.
I guess one other thing that we would add is certainly one of the learnings has been how to balance groups that want to invest and groups that want rights. And we've had to think about when is the right time to bring our product out of the U.S. because it's got proprietary elements to it, and when are we comfortable having somebody else be interested in making it. And so I think one of the things that comes across when you're talking about fundraising is go to Asia, it's really prolific and full of funds, and there's a difference between going to Asia and raising money and going to Asia with a deal, and sequencing that has to be done with care. And as a fundraiser, you're really thinking about how do I maximize my ability to raise funds, but you do have to process what's the right time to have a partnership versus what's the right time to have an investor. That's been one of our learnings so far.
Very interesting. Michael Tippy, you mentioned in particular in working with family funds that it's not like the institutional folks where there's everyone on staff is an MD or PhD and they're heavy into the science or preclinical data, etc., depending on which area you're in. So maybe you could just, and the other panelists could talk to us a little bit about tools that you use to communicate through those meetings, while at the same time Magnar has shared with us the importance of meeting with institutions. So it's almost like you've got, and from a storytelling standpoint, you're almost working in parallel tracks. So what are the tools that you think are the must for entrepreneurs and CEOs to have as they tell their story?
Well, specifically with family offices where you don't have a scientifically sophisticated investor, a very common thing to do, and really common with generalist investors, who may invest in other areas, is to say, let's first of all prove to them that there's a significant market, and then let's put the science to the side for a minute. Assume the science is good. They will often look at the reputations of the scientists involved to get that first cut, and then focus on the rest of the business. That's advantageous because you can get through the business part of it, and then when they get fully invested enough in the process, they may hire a consultant who is a specialist in that particular area of whatever it is, immunology, genetics, molecular biology, chemistry, whatever it is. So if you go to a family office, with a completely technology-heavy, here's our data, and here's the most recent 5 papers in Nature that prove our hypothesis, although we don't have any data yet, that's going to be tough. So to put the science to the side for a bit and get to the business issues first has always worked well for me.
Great. And how many meetings do you think it takes to actually build the relationship, right? It's not always just one meeting that gets you the check. Any insights from the panelists?
Never one meeting. Are you kidding?
How many do you think it takes before you actually kind of get there?
I don't know if you can count that, but I think from our view, actually what's been so much interesting is some of the best interactions have been when someone says no, because then you have something to work on, and then you can do problem solving around it. And so I don't think you can count the number of meetings. It's just n to the whatever. But what we found is getting some sort of a reaction. I like this because, I don't like this because, gives us a way to come back and say, let me help you bridge where you had a challenge, and being able to work on a problem with the family office or the investor and be able to kind of reorient what might be an objection and turn it into why it's an investment hypothesis has been one of our most successful, actually, traction points.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think for us, maybe on average something like 7 interactions with the investor before you can get to a point where you can at least be talking about terms.
Sounds like you're tracking them.
Yeah, well, I'm sort of old-fashioned in that I have an Excel spreadsheet, and you asked about the tools that we use.
Salesforce.com.
Yeah, that's something I've been toying around with as a way of maybe maximizing my effectiveness. But the other thing that's crucial, particularly if you're working in Asia, if you have a virtual data room on Dropbox or Box.net is what we use. Our bankers sort of approved their platforms. None of those will work in China. So our advisor helped us set up one, I think QQ or Tencent on some system that he mirrors what we have in Dropbox and then makes available to prospective investors in China. So that's, I think, a crucial piece of the fundraising toolkit.
Yeah, I think it's hard to quantify because it also depends on which stage you are and what you're looking for. Let's say you're like a very early stage, you're looking for a small investment to get going. It can be very quick because decision makers are the ones you're talking to. So that you can have an answer in a couple of meetings, and that's fine. Let's say you're looking for a $30 million investment from a VC. Well, that will take a lot of meetings because you'll have to meet with a team that then will take you to the other team, then they'll bring consultants, then they'll look at every single thing from the financial point of view, the intellectual property point of view, the management. So that will take a lot, but it depends on where you are and what you want. And the most important thing to really minimize the number of meetings and look for alignment, early on, am I aligned with this group? What are they looking for? Can my company provide what they're looking for? Is it a good fit? So I love the name of your company, Michael, like Alignment, right? Alignment Ventures, that's great. Because if you have that really makes things much easier. Because you don't want to be spending time talking to people that at the end of the day they'll say, well, we don't have a fund anymore, or we only invest in, I don't know, coffee beans. You know,
Maybe one follow-up on that is certainly we use the database a lot, and we've found it very valuable to cut the database a number of different ways. So we have our criteria for us who invest in diagnostics, who invest in diabetes, maybe a group that invests in prenatal health, but then we've also cut it by, you'll get your list of maybe 250 potential candidates, and then the groups that only invest in Kansas. Well, we're not in Kansas. And then the groups that only want to put in, say, 50K. And so you cut that list down to, in our case, focusing on a lead. Well, a lead for us is probably a group that can invest $1 million or more. So for our first set of outreach, we're going to titrate that list to really focus on who could be a lead investor, because that's our most pressing question. And then from the lead investors to find the size that's a good fit. But then, it's definitely, we use, I think what you said, Magda, we really work very diligently in the first set of meetings to qualify, are we on the same page? What's your process? If the answer is, we have a valuation threshold, do you want to find that out early, just in case we're really separate? If a group has a certain estimate on time to return, we certainly want to know that. So we've kind of developed a set of practical questions to tell us, what's your criteria, what's your process like? And certainly, a group that's late in the fund might be unwilling to take on an investment like ours. And so, again, I think there's a lot of upfront work. Well, I don't think we try to numerically assess the meetings. We do try to put a lot of upfront work into the relationship building to find out whether we're at least anywhere there's a connection. Because time is so precious.
It is. And from my perspective, I don't think of it as the number of meetings. I think of it as a series of gating events. So as you go into due diligence with an investor, your probability of success in getting a check goes up, right? So there will be buying signals. Are they going to do intellectual property due diligence? You got to hire an attorney. That costs money. That's buy-in. Are they going to do due diligence on the management team? It takes time. Their currency is time too. So you have to realize that if they're investing their time, and to a lesser degree their money, but primarily their time, then they're sending you buying signals. If it takes 2 weeks to return your phone call, maybe they're not so interested and you shouldn't spend your time there. So,
Great.
this is a sales process, right?
Sure.
It's you've got to build your funnel. So you have lots of initial meetings, qualify, and then finally close. Well, there's a lot of stuff in the qualifying before the closing.
So, Michael, you bring up a good point, which is my last question before we open up to the floor for questions around resources and what does this actually cost, right? So we're in the process of raising money, but in order to raise it, we have to spend money. So maybe the panel could talk a little bit about what resources do you need? What resource did you think you didn't need that you ended up needing that may be useful for the audience to understand? Who would like to jump in? Joyce?
Sure. So, one of the things, we had a prep call on Friday, and one of the discussions were some of the questions that were important, and I think you actually put it out there, that fundraising costs money. And so, you're a startup and I know what a paperclip costs, right? You know how much everything costs, and you're being really, really cost conscious. But you don't want to stop running the company, and so you have product development. And then, you don't fundraise from your desk. You have to get out into the world, and it costs time to interact. And then diligence, you have your IP counsel on the phone. Do we diligence with an investor? You have to pay them. And so I think what our lessons, as I thought about prepping, it is not possible to start fundraising too early. It always takes longer, as we all know, than you expect. And you do have to have a fundraising budget. And I think the biggest cost actually from our learning was the time it took internally to get everybody on the same page for how much money we needed to raise. I think that's probably one of the most unexpected costs is, why can't we raise more? Why can't we raise less? Do we have to sell this much of the company? That's a lot of our internal discussion, and I think that's probably what everybody has as a part of the hurdle. So there's the money, the cash outlay for doing the steps, there's the prep for your materials to be fully ready to go through diligence, but then there's the alignment internally so that when you're fundraising, you have to be bold and committed and very clear. You can't be tentative, and that means having internal alignment is one of our, I think, our most important ahas. Because saying you want to go out and raise a Series B, you might find on your team everybody has a different mindset about what Series B looks like, and so crystallizing the internal alignment, I think, is one of our most kind of aha look-backs.
Yeah, I think it was $100,000. It's going to take at least a year in general and an undergrad. And
Is that by series or just in general?
Well, it depends on who you're going after. If you're going after investors overseas, it takes more money, because I can't do a trip to Europe for less than about $5,000, even if I'm staying in Airbnbs and flying, middle seat squish. So,
I'm sure you have upgrades.
it just costs money, and it's just amazing how much money it costs. Going to conferences, flying in to meet people. You can't do it on air, and you cannot do it by email. It just does not work. We evolved to interact face to face. People are writing you a check. They want to look in your eyes.
I think I saw a note in Harvard Business Review. It takes, I think, a face-to-face meeting is 34 times more successful than an email. So pretty much it tells you how infinitesimally small your chances are if you're fundraising via email.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I fully agree with all of your comments. I think that at this time we kind of believe that because we have so many tools, so many databases and access to email, and we can work a sales process like that. It doesn't work. You need a face-to-face or many face-to-faces. One comment I would make, in addition to financial cost, is the cost of resources. I mean, fundraising is draining. When you're the CEO, it's a major drain, and you have to be constantly traveling if necessary. If you have a potential investor in Boston that wants to meet you tomorrow morning, guess what? You're going to go there tomorrow morning. And so it takes an amazing drain, and it's very hard for a CEO to be running the operations, running the company at the same time, do fundraising. And following up also on one of your comments, Michael, I think when you look at, let's say, Asia, well, there is money in Asia. Yes, but are you ready for that? Because it's going to take a lot of time and resources, and when you're jet lagged, maybe you're not as good coming back and running your show. So it's just very difficult, and you have to be extremely strategic, and depending on where you are in the process of growth of your company, then you have to look at the investors that are a good fit. This is in an ideal world, right? Sometimes you need money, and then it's like maybe the money is not going to be exactly having the profile that you've decided on papers, and you'll have to be a lot more opportunistic. But it does take time, resources, and in my case, I mean, the resources, it's a lot more important than the actual dollar amount.
Great. Let's open it up to the floor. Would you, maybe you could just state your name so that everyone knows who you are?
Hi, I'm Kerry Adams, Almond Tree Capital. I'd be very interested in the panel's take on what people are expecting in terms of exits. When you're raising money, what can you tell them convincingly about when they're going to get their money back? What's your take on the exit markets?
Well, you have to do your comparable analysis carefully, of course, both acquisition and IPO. And I mean, the metrics for venture are well known. I mean, for a seed investment, it's probably 10 to 20, probably 20 times your money. Even for buyouts at Norwest, we did buyouts. We wouldn't do a buyout for less than 5 to 7x. And that's much lower risk than what we're talking about here.
But have you seen the appetite for acquisitions changing with policy, with the economy, with whatever causes the weather to change in the exit market?
I think it's safe to say that, at least for a while, the IPO window was not particularly great, and now it seems like it's coming back, and at least for the smaller type of public offerings. And I've seen a number of companies taking advantage of markets other than NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange as a way of creating some liquidity. But when it comes to the big pharma type acquisition, I have seen, at least in our space, it's very difficult to raise money in metabolism, diabetes, and as a result of that kind of squeeze of capital, when something truly revolutionary comes around, the exits tend to be quite astronomical if there's a competitive bidding environment. So, one of the tools that we use, I think it's helpful to do the math of creating the waterfall. Series A will have, if you find the comparables for the deal, the Series A return will be X, Series B will be X. Of course, the seed investors will have that 20x type return, and it just sort of helps the investors frame their expectations a bit.
I think that it depends again of which stage you're at. If you talk to a seed investor, if you talk to an angel, very often these people are not as sensitive to that. They want to help and they want to have a return, but they don't have a number. Obviously, a 10x would be great. You talk to early stage VCs, you always have a time component too. So in my world, it's 10 years, 10x at least. If you talk to late stage VCs, where they come at a higher valuation, then they have a shorter time frame, a shorter return expectation. So it could be 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5x. So it depends on who you're talking to, and it depends on the risk appetite for the investors. The higher the risk they take, the higher the return they want, which I think makes sense.
But
That's been my experience.
I agree with you, but you have to realize, for a VC anyway, to raise another fund, you have to have an internal rate of return on your fund in excess of 15%. And you can do the math from there. I mean, most VCs are looking at 40% IRR, so including the time value of money.
One last point I'd add is, for us, certainly as fundraising, it is expected that you're having strategic partnering discussions, and the fact that we can get through diligence and have potential investors talk to our potential partners has been very important. So there are the metrics you talk about, but being in the market and saying, here are my potential buyers, and we know who they are, and these are some deals that you've seen before, and you can talk to them because we're talking to them at the right state of diligence, certainly is another important piece from our experience.
Our moderator had to split.
Yes,
Other questions?
So any other questions, please feel free to, please.
Just a quick question, Keon Sunny with Independent. You mentioned the sales process, so it's always a compelling event that drives things at the end.
Right.
And when you don't have a second compelling event, what has been your experience to actually get someone over the finish line from an investment standpoint? So if it's a second investor, for instance, or what drives someone to actually invest when time is really on their side? Is it always a second investor that someone has to compete with?
Yeah, the herd effect is dangerous. That's a very dangerous card to play because, venture capitalists or any investor, it's kind of like, the herd of deer is grazing peacefully, and then all of a sudden something spooks them, bang, they're gone. So that's the train's leaving the station argument is a very dangerous one to employ. You better make sure you've got backups to pull that card.
I think from our view, the most compelling really statement is that you have a lead investor. And, as you said, Magda, every investor is a discussion, right? And you have your perfect relationship and they have their view, and it's how you come to a meeting point in the middle. But having a lead is the most important. And so from our view, you never stop fundraising until the check has cleared. And so you say you have a lead, but your lead is your lead when their check is in the bank. Until that time, you're still looking for a backup lead. And so maybe that's one way to think about it.
And we didn't talk about this, but you got to be aware that finding a lead is 75% of your work. Okay? So we talked about this in the prep call, but we didn't bring this out in the comments, but that's really important to focus on. If you're spending a lot of time with a person who says, look, I'll be happy to follow, if you don't have a lead, it's a very tenuous use of time.
But on the comment with the lead, from an investor perspective,
the lead's money's already in, right? So and it depends on type of lead as well.
No, the money goes into escrow. No money comes to the company until the whole round is closed,
Okay.
in general, for any sophisticated investor.
Joyce, you mentioned the bringing the investor with a partner together, and you said at the right time.
Mhm.
When would you consider to be the right time?
That's a very important question.
Yeah, it
And
is.
so, it's like right now.
That's Novartis calling.
It's pretty good on that. But for us, it's been important to, you want to make sure that the relationship is mature enough. It's like, when are you going to bring your significant other home to meet your parents? Think about it in like human terms, and you don't want to bring them home so soon that it's like awkward if you don't want to meet them again. But you want to get them involved, and so we find that, just it's practical, right? And so definitely when there's a grounded, stated, and sincere commitment to moving forward, and it's a gating item for the investor, we'll try to do what Mike said, is really knock off as much as humanly possible, because that call has risk for both sides. It's not a tire-kicking call, and clearly the investor is going to gain a huge amount in general from that interaction, because strategic partners just don't let anybody come in and pick their brain, and so they're going to gain much more than the diligence on you, and so timing it is really critical, but it can really accelerate the diligence process. So, not immediately, not the first call, but later when you've got a much more grounded connection. That's our experience.
A couple of rules of thumb on strategics that I found to be helpful. They tend to increase the chances of a successful exit significantly, so it can be very, very helpful to have input and capital from a potential acquirer or partner. But typically, if you have one, I would recommend that you have a second one as sort of a backup. It sort of tends to taint an auction process. If you're doing like a worldwide M&A roadshow, they'll say, well, you have Pfizer, why don't they just buy it? And there's any number of reasons why that could be a possibility or not be a possibility, but it tends to limit your upside unless you have maybe 2 or 3 groups involved. And I think to the extent that the big pharmas, like the big splashy M&A exit of selling for $500 million or $1 billion to one of the big pharmas, you tend to want to conserve the regional rights since they always want worldwide rights first. But having said that, I've seen many entrepreneurs build sort of a regional array of partnerships and frankly have a much better financial outcome by finding a partner in Japan and Korea and Australia and Brazil. So that can be very effective. You just have to sort of run with one strategy or the other.
Christian regarding part of Gary here. Quick question on strategics. How early do you go and talk to them without risking being bypassed, or how quickly can you talk to the strategics without risking your business?
Well, one of the guys at Novartis in Switzerland told me, it costs us $20,000 to get together a meeting, because these are multinational corporations. They're flying in from all over the place. So you get that shot once every 2 or 3 years. Better take it carefully. There's only, 20 drug companies in the world?
From our perspective, we find that those strategic partners change a lot, right? They reorganize and they have people who come and go, and so you create a relationship with Harry and the Harry's gone to do something else. That's a challenge. But it also takes time to build trust, and they're used to companies coming and having a plan, everything's going to be great, and then the timeline kind of moves. It's part of life. And so they have to, on the one hand, it's $20K to put together a meeting. On the other hand, they're investing in you and in the product. And just as an investor, it takes them time to decide, are you for real? Is this a good idea? You sell one person, they have to go and sell a lot more people, because in a strategic, you're talking to a decision maker, but they don't actually write checks, right? They go through committees to write checks, and so you need to enable them to buy in. And so we found, certainly it's important right from the get-go to decide, does anybody want this? Is anyone going to buy this? And finding out, what would you need to see to make this a compelling acquisition? And so we tried to find that out early, and that helped us, really, really helped us, because in some respects, You know, on the downside, it takes a lot of meetings and you go through a lot of people and you get frustrated. On the upside, they actually can really help you shape your company and think through and really it's almost like coming up with a target product profile. And if you know what your customer, in our sense, our customer is clearly the patient, but that's not the first customer. The first customer is our strategic, and I want to know what do they need to see to buy us. I may not be able to deliver it next year, but it's helping me to talk with an investor and say, if I can deliver this, I know we have a viable asset. And so it's a huge help. I would say, talk as soon as you can. And you know what? You shouldn't need to have an IP disclosure or a CDA in place to have a conversation. If you can't explain what it is without that, you have to pause for a minute. You should be able to tell the story without any, I think, constraints. Again, it's how you tell it. But to get the point across, we would say start early from our experience.
And in the device world, to get an LOI from a strategic, is that a valuation tool?
A letter of intent
Yeah.
as a valuation tool, in our experience, without question. Because again, as you said, it costs money. But I'm sure there's considerations on that, but from our experience, having someone who's willing to put on a piece of paper a set of terms that clearly got vetted and reviewed by other people, they didn't do that because of a first meeting. They did that because of a relationship. And so that, again, it's your buy-in process. To think of the number of people who had to buy in to make that decision on their side creates buy-in for you as a company.
I think from our perspective, finding the scientific champion is the hardest part and the most important part to focus on early. So I go to Bio and JP Morgan and a bunch of other conferences every year where I try to at least update the major potential partners at least once every year. But once you have that scientific champion, the boardroom champion becomes a little bit easier, which is to say a lot easier in all candor. But until you have that scientific champion, you're probably not going to get a lot done. So that's why you have to sort of start cultivating that crowd early.
Yeah, in my experience, the scientific champion is absolutely essential, and it pays to do a small demonstration project where that scientific champion is not risking their career to back you. And that's been very important to me and has led to much, much bigger deals later.
Great. Thank you all for taking part.